Welcome to the Link to Change podcast. I'm Hayley Brown, Chief Executive at Link to Change. Each week, myself and my special guest will discuss key areas on exploitation and some of the questions that you in your community have brought to us. I would like to introduce my special guest, Dr. Audrey Tang, Chartered Psychologist and host of Mental Health Matters on California's E360 TV.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you.
Oh, it's great to carry on our conversation.
Yes.
You were so kind to be on Mental Health Matters to talk about exploitation. And that generates a lot of conversation, which is what we want. And I have some questions from our viewers.
Brilliant,
for you.
brilliant.
This is on the cycle of victim blaming, which... It's a really prevalent attitude in society. It's a prevalent attitude in the media, and even professionals seem to do it. How do we begin to challenge that, especially if you're a parent, as you know, going with your child?
Yes,
to try and deal
with this? It's an uphill battle, and I feel like victim blaming is such a key aspect of exploitation, and why we don't see as many young people disclose because of beliefs, because of attitudes, or sometimes when that young person retracts their statement, it has been around the victim blaming language that has been used about them. So I think a key words is thinking about what keywords when talking about victim blaming. So some of those key words may be child prostitute. I've heard that one before. They were putting themselves in a dangerous situation. They have risky behaviours.
What does that even mean?
So it's words like that. And, you know, as I've said, and I will continue to say, exploitation is a really hard thing to identify because of that grooming process. And grooming is so natural. It is hard to identify. And I think that to be able to challenge those attitudes in society, we have to think and put ourselves in the position of that victim. And I don't like the word victim either. I prefer the word survivor, because victim in itself is almost victim blaming. This is someone that has been abused. And there's so many aspects around the subject matter, whether that be the media, whether that be professionals, whether that might be a family member, it might be a parent. You know, it's such a huge thing.
And sort of related to that, you have spoken on a previous podcast about the survivor or the abused needs to recognise the exploitation in the first instance. But then when it comes to disclosing it afterwards, how can we create safer spaces for that disclosure? How can we get over some of those barriers to disclosure?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the professional's understanding.
Yes, true.
Or the parent's understanding, depending upon who that young person is disclosing to. So if they don't have an understanding of what exploitation is, if they don't have an understanding of that young person that potentially is going to disclose, or just an understanding in how a child or a young person operates.
That is very true, actually, because it is different. It's not what we would normally do.
Yeah. So being able to kind of bring in those elements, I think, is the very first thing in creating that safe space. So what we then tend to see is that there may be a safe space a young person discloses, but because of the way that it's been perceived, the way that it's been received, can then cause difficulties in itself for that young person, which then means that they can retract. It then means that they then say, oh, no, I don't want to go any further with this, just ignore what I've said. Because, and that's normally, like I say, due to that lack of understanding. So as a parent myself, is very, very difficult. I understand that parents need to be aware of so many different things in society nowadays and have so much of an understanding. And if your child comes to you and discloses that something has happened to them, whether it has been a sexual assault, whether it has been they have been running drugs for a perpetrator, whether that be that young person is struggling with their mental health, it doesn't have to be about exploitation. Sometimes a parent's gut reaction is to, oh, heckles up, It becomes about the anger for the parent, the frustration for the parent, the understanding. Am I a good enough parent?
Yes.
Because for any parent, at some point in that parenting journey, you are going to say in your head, am I a good enough parent? And am I doing this well enough? Your then child comes to you and something's happened to them. There's so many different thought processes and defenses. Creating that safe space is about listening to that young person, reflecting on what they've said, rather than saying, well, I think, I know, I feel. It's about you feel, you know, and believing what that young person is trying to say, because it's that listening aspect to it that is really, really key.
Yes, it is. It is about holding that safety for them and keeping that anxiety, because it must take a lot to say something. I mean, relating to that, you talked about sometimes when a child discloses, it's the way that disclosure is received. I know some of our viewers have actually said they're professionals. A child has disclosed, they've tried to take it further, but then they've been shut down completely when they try to progress it to safeguarding. And one person even said to us that safeguarding wouldn't answer the phone. So they've been told that was her only option.
Yeah.
Safeguarding wouldn't answer the phone. So how can professionals be better trained to identify, respond to exploitation, respond to disclosures without the blaming and without the it's not my responsibility?
I think the key thing is that classic saying of safeguarding is everyone's business. And I know we have discussed before about there being no legal obligation to report abuse. That needs to change first and foremost. And I, over my many years of working with children and young people, I have worked with professionals, and I have worked with some amazing professionals, and I've worked with some where they just don't understand the young person.
Yes.
If you don't understand as a professional, if you don't understand what exploitation is, if you don't understand what victim blaming is, if you don't understand the legalities, then that's where I always say, well, we'll pick up the phone and ask. But then you're then relying on, and we know that we are in a situation where funding is being cut left, right and centre, and places do not have capacity, professionals do not have capacity. We know that the demands on local authorities, we know the demands on social care, we know that professionals in this field sadly are overworked, over capacity. Doesn't excuse.
No.
It doesn't excuse it. And I think that is one of the other biggest issues, is that inconsistencies in responses, inconsistencies in availability, and something somewhere needs to change. However, I do always believe that this is something that needs to come top down as well as bottom up. You can have the best professionals in the world, but if there's no support from either direction, then you're fighting a battle.
And so maybe there's almost a pincer movement here as well that could happen with the changes in, well, firstly the legal framework, but also the media portrayal. What can we do to shift that focus from victim behaviour, so the blaming side, to perpetrator accountability?
Wow, exactly. So, what we still find is some of our young people that are being exploited, especially criminally exploited, they are being criminalised. Laws, I have an understanding. I have a family that are police backgrounds, I understand all of those different types of things. But I think it's about understanding where that process is. And for some young people, they have been groomed and exploited for so long that it's almost like they've moved, the best way to describe it, they've moved up the ranks to where the point that their behaviour is criminal behaviour. But I think it's about understanding those young people and trying to protect those young people as much. And the NRM process, which is the National Referral Mechanism, that is a process that is in place to be able to protect some of those young people from being prosecuted because they have been groomed, which has then led to criminalised behaviours. And I think that is a great system. It's not utilised. No. It is a process where it requires a lot of multi-agency input. Again, professionals being overwhelmed, overstretched. That multi-agency input, the where that then sits on where that kind of goes through. But anyway, I've kind of gone off on a tangent, I guess, a little bit. But in terms of the way that the media portrays young people, they're seen as naughty kids.
Yes, it's a very common thing.
They're seen as bad kids, and for as much education that there is, and from all of the key things that we've learned from cases such as in Rotherham, professionals' perceptions and public perceptions haven't changed. They're not necessarily thinking about that young person, and it is a stereotype that is portrayed of that young person. Victims are not being recognised as being exploited. There are still comments that come from, well, it's a particular type of young person. So people have in their heads, this is a young person that doesn't like school, rebels against everything, is from a broken home or a looked after child. And I don't know how many times, I probably say it in a day, but this happens to everybody. It happens to absolutely anyone. And we need to think about what's happened, and we need to start believing in these young people.
Wow. Is there one thing that we can do following listening to this podcast where we can change our language or change our approach or change our thinking?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot around changing our languages and changing our approach of how things are perceived. Avoiding phrases. Yes. That is a massive one. Yes. So they knew what they were doing. They should have just left the situation. I hear that all the time. These young people have been groomed. They have been coerced. They have and are experiencing trauma. If you don't have an understanding of trauma responses, so the key 5 different trauma responses. So to pick one, for example, you freeze.
Yeah.
A person freezes, and so when someone says, "Well, why didn't they just kick them and leave?" Or why didn't they just do this? That individual person's response is to freeze and not do anything, and before they know it, something is happening to them that they don't really want to happen. And sometimes that young person's comprehension of what has happened to them. I mean, we see now victims of sexual abuse don't disclose until they're in their 30s, 40s. Yes. Something that has happened to them from a very, very early age. whether that be 5, 6, teenage years, sometimes they've not seen that as abuse because of the situation, because of the circumstances. And it's not until they've gotten older that they've gone, hold on a minute. It can be something someone said, it can be something they've watched, it could be something they've read, that they go, oh, hold on a minute.
That was actual
sexual abuse that happened to me. But it's not the way it's been seen, and it's not been the way that it's perceived. So it's being able to recognise that coercion, recognise that trauma within that person, and especially in terms of exploitation, the lack of control. Someone has control over these young people.
Yes.
Someone is controlling everything that happens to them and everything that is said, and understand that, recognise that, and see that for what that is. Another key thing, I guess, is about how can we change is supporting without judgment.
Yeah.
And it's going back to that listening and that safe space for that young person. Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Everyone has the ability to educate themselves, especially with the wonderful world of AI now.
Yes, that is very true.
You know, if you don't understand, there are so many different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, you might not be a person that can pick up a book. It might be someone that, you know, is unable to read. There's so many ways and means out there now to be able to educate yourself. You tell me a person, find me a person that doesn't at some point watch the television, that doesn't at some point watch YouTube, find a video. You know, it's about learning about it and education.
And that's a really nice point to reflect on for this podcast. Thank you again. I learned so much, so thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like you to think about stay safe, educate yourself, and let's protect the future for our children and young people.